Hello, my name is Cassie, and here I'll talk about media that I find interesting. Now, in this particular spring afternoon, my intention is to talk about Tim Burton's Corpse Bride and how it tackles death, love, and marriage. This movie has lived for a very long time in the shadow of his eldest sibling, The Nightmare Before Christmas, because, the characters aren't as merchandisable, the music isn't as memorable, and it isn't a Halloween/Christmas classic as The Nightmare Before Christmas is. But I want to claim Corpse Bride is a masterful movie, one that may lack the recognition and easy profitability that the other one has, but that touches on topics so heavy that the other one could never really tackle. And the tale aspect of it, in my opinion, is wonderfully executed by the fact that while we aren't given a lot of information on how people travel from one land to the other or how these magic systems work, it only tells us the bare bones of what we need to know for the story to go on. Besides, the logic in this universe isn't what really matters. What does are the characters and the relationships to one another. What matters are the themes, the dualities, the differences between life and death, the freedom and expression that comes with death, and the responsibilities, obligation, and repression, yes, that comes with life. So, is this a pro-death movie? It would be easy to think that, considering how much nicer the world of the dead is made to look compared to the drab world of the living. But I'd like to think that it has a healthier view on life and death and the mourning and overall the celebration of life. The world can be drab and dull and unpleasant, and it can be so for many people, and it is so for many people, probably most people in this world. Compared to it, a world of freedom, of no repression, of no responsibilities, truly sounds like heaven. It's a place to rest from the hardships of life. But what this movie gets to is that life's ordeals are often in conjunction with the things that make it worth living. I don't mean the worst parts of life, those that nobody should ever have to go through. Trauma, exploitation, abuse. I mean the pressures we face every day, the fear to talk to someone new, the anxiety surrounding having compromised, a big decision, all the little things that can have a good or a bad outcome, the things people choose for themselves, that which proves we have a will of our own. The capacity to choose, to live free, and to decide what one does with the time one is given, I think, is what gives the grey world of the living the little color it may have. I want to keep the gushing about the animation to a minimum because obviously it's excellent. But one thing that I think is just delectable, a testament to the artistry of the animation team, are all the little face quirks and expressions and reactions that truly sell the emotional moments, especially when paired with wonderful voice performances. The animation, by the way, has these amazing subtleties to it thanks to the painstaking work made with clockwork devices inside the puppets' heads, which allowed animators to make extremely small changes to their facial expressions to get some pretty amazing performances from a medium often characterized by having little to no facial expression at all, based entirely on body movement. You know, like puppets. But this body movement is not replaced by better facial acting. It is complemented, especially when one considers the composition of several shots that have close-ups of the characters' expressions, and wider shots that show their body movements in complement and contrast to one another. The textures, too, do a lot of subtle work, like how the world of the dead has much more variation in it, from the warm fabrics to the broken down walls to the roughness of exposed bone. The character design also heightens these differences. While the dead characters certainly look freaky, they are also most often designed for more liberty of movement, more in the position to be able to dance, to move around. The people in the world of the living, however, most clearly exemplified by the two Everglade servants, are designed for their function. the butler to be upright and dignified, and the maid to be subdued, docile, and bent by her work. This could also be read in the exaggeration of Victoria's parents compared to those of Victor. While Victor's parents have a more normal look to them, Victoria's parents are more cartoony, feeling a lot like 19th century caricatures. The mother's imposing height, aided by her hairstyle, the father's impotence and Napoleon complex, visually communicated by his exaggerated shortness compared to the rest of the cast. This idea of exaggeration as a shorthand for character is also present even in comparatively slight characters like Pastor Galswells, who, much like Victoria's mother, has the artificial height attributed to a figure of authority, aided further by the length of his thin nose and chin, which seem to be pointing accusatory at all times. On the other hand, more round-like characters like the cook, like the spider, like the maggot, are meant to be friendlier and more trustworthy, and with these being their only truly exaggerated features. Carlos Rangel, the amazing character designer, was given freedom to experiment with the silhouettes and to give each character their own very particular shape, which translated to a very varied and attractive cast in which there is no way to confuse one character for the other. Beauty is not the main objective, because Rangel understands that it comes from the characters themselves, not from random standards of beauty. Exaggeration can be beautiful, can be expressive and aesthetically pleasing. It's just a bit of a downer that the three main characters, the one made to look the most normal and the most relatable, do adhere to these traditional European standards of beauty, the big eyes, the small nose, the whole shebang. Still, this is something not often seen in stop-motion animation, cartoony shapes with realistic expressiveness. There is no search for beautiful cartoons that look the most like their human counterparts. There is no search for realism in form. That is left to creativity, to visual communication. The movements, however, and the acting, in the most live-action sense of the word, is purposely fine-tuned and delicate, realistic, to further convey emotions in subtler, more nuanced ways. This is often associated with a less wild style of animation, further from the grand body movements of Disney, and more akin to those of smaller studios like Laika and Erdmann, which are also often less worried about appealing to a child audience. I feel like there is a belief, especially in these big companies like Disney and Pixar, that children only want to see comfortable figures, comfortable designs. The sort of characters that look more recognizably human-like. They're soft and pretty and have pleasant facial features and don't push the limits of what can be considered beautiful. This is so boring to me. Everything ends up with a sameness, with a lack of individuality, with a lack of expression and distinction. Give everyone variety. These sort of beliefs only constrain the imagination. Real life is varied in colors, shapes, and expressions. Animation should reflect that, even if it's distorted by artistic choices. The humanity, despite the cartooniness, seeps through and surprises us with the empathy we can project into what are essentially creepy puppets. Okay, enough about animation. There's people who know a lot more than me who have talked far more intelligently on the matter. Let's go back to story and characters. The movie spends the first 15 minutes of its runtime without the titular corpse bride, instead focusing on presenting us the world of the living, introducing the characters who live there and portraying the relationships that bind Victor, our protagonist. Like the typical Burton main character, what we have here is a loner, a weirdo, a melancholic anti-hero who doesn't fit in, who is pushed by responsibility and obligations to the rest of the world. Though, out of most of his characters, this is one who actually has a reason to be anxious. Not only is he an embarrassment to his parents, a disappointment to his future parents-in-law, he is also pressured into an arranged marriage with a woman he likes, sure, but which is still understandably something he is made to do. not something he chose to do out of his own free will. The difference in social status is daunting enough.
Shouldn't Victoria Everglot be marrying a lord or something?
Oh, nonsense.
The plot kicker is when Victor, free from the prying eyes of those who pressure him, manifests his desire for marriage out of his own free will, managing to convince himself to marry Victoria and to declare the vows properly, only to have his newfound motivation interrupted by his accidental marriage to the wrong bride, Emily. And this is when the story really starts, when Victor is whisked away to the land of the dead, his motivations now clear. Those first 15-20 minutes of the movie were all about creating the characters, though. We know that Victor didn't just decide to marry Victoria, we know Victoria herself, we know the context from where these two young people came from. When we learn about Emily's story, that's when finally our three main characters are completely introduced to us, and the conflicts between them can begin. Emily is immediately framed as a threat, as an obstacle in the fulfillment of the actual wedding, the one of Victor and Victoria. But just as Victoria turns out to be more than a quiet, gentle lady, Emily turns out to be more than a flighty, moonstruck bride-to-be. Despite her kidnapping of Victor, her constant misinterpretation of Victor's intention and desire to accommodate her own, her kind of selfishness, to be honest, she's still someone to feel for, to empathize with. Through the best musical number in the movie, her backstory is told, presenting her as the unwitting victim of a terrible crime. And most importantly, after she, again, ignores his clear attempts to escape, Victor and Emily have a real conversation, one in which Victor also begins to empathize with her. Of course, certainly not enough to want to stay in the land of the dead just yet. So Emily also has a clear motivation, even though it may be unknown to herself, not only to be married, but to stay married, to keep Victor from running away. She lies to herself, not seeming to care about how he feels about this whole deal. As kind as she is, what with giving him the remains of his dog Scraps, a nicely personal present, and evidently caring about him, she really doesn't seem to care how he feels. Emily is still too in denial to see the obvious rejection he has for her. After all, she's finally married, and she has to think about what she wants about herself.
Death has already parted you.
If he finds out, he'll leave.
And Victor's understandably terrified. Even as he grows to like her, to get used to her, he still has that first motivation to marry Victoria. Their desires aren't compatible. And when he finally speaks his mind clearly to her, well...
Listen, under different circumstances, well, who knows? But we're just too different. I mean, you're dead.
You should have thought about that before you asked me to marry you.
Why can't you understand? It was a mistake. I would never marry you.
Which is tactless, yes, but in no way a lie or a mean-spirited remark. The movie goes out of its way to constantly remind us that she is dead. After Emily's solo song and Time to Sulk, Victor realizes that, well, he made a mistake, was a bit rude, and properly apologizes. And the relationship between them is mended in this lovely scene, which sort of mirrors Victor and Victoria's first encounter. However, despite their strengthened bond, Victor's motivation hasn't changed yet. It is only when he is told that Victoria has married someone else and that the future he'd been working for is now impossible that he has to accept it. And despite sympathizing with her for the terrible crime that costed her life, he really owes nothing to Emily and would have every right to still be resentful to her for basically kidnapping him. Instead, he accepts to marry her, despite it costing him his life. Victor's motivation changes. And it makes sense. From the first shot of the movie, and really by our expectations towards Burton's character default, the audience can safely assume Victor is a loner and doesn't have many social connections nor clear objectives. his only motivation, the one which had been driving the plot so far, was to go back home and marry his fiancée. And then he doesn't even have that anymore. All that he has left now is his life, and he is willing to sacrifice it for Emily. He, right now, behaves selflessly. He cares for her emotion, for her wants, and sees that this is his last chance to make someone else happy. And that's really dang sweet. Beyond the awful idea that suicide would be like a good idea.
Some people are worth melting for.
Yeah, no. Because sacrifice, and I'm going to drop one hot take here, does not equal love. Selflessness, a choice to put someone else's happiness over one's own, is a loving gesture. Self-sacrifice, or the suicide for love, that old romantic with capital R concept, is completely focused on the self. Here Victor understands that in order to be fully married to Emily, to fulfill her desire and motivation, he needs to self-sacrifice, to commit suicide. And the fact that he has no self-preservation, nothing else for him to do, no other motivation or reason to stay alive. I mean, it could simply be because of the fairy tale aspect of it, a lack of dedication to develop Victor's further interests. But also, it paints a really hopeless picture of Victor's life. I don't think it's just a coincidence that the world of the dead looks much more colorful and lively than Victor's world of the living. Of course, there's no place for that hopelessness with the news of the marriage. Another curious contrast, the celebratory joy of someone taking their own life. Finally, after being engaged, being betrayed by her groom-to-be and murdered, then thinking she was married and being rejected and betrayed again, Emily finally has her desires assured to her, validated, and closer than ever to being a reality. Victor is genuinely interested in her, in marrying her, in going through all the proper motions. After a moment of desperation, Emily's motivation is about to be fulfilled.
Speak low when you speak love. How summer day with us away. Too soon.
Following on that, the most emotionally resonant moments, it needs to be remarked, are those with a noted lack of dialogue, centered completely on actions. Victor and Emily's duet, the encounter of the living and the dead, all of this plays up the contrast and finds a way to bridge them without sacrificing their nature. Victor and the townsfolk are still alive, Emily and the dead are still, well, dead. But these things are not enough to make them separate. Affection, empathy, and mutual recognition can surpass this barrier between the two worlds. Words are often not enough. The wedding vows, while beautiful poetry in their own right, serve to explain what is already performed in the wedding ritual, a series of actions symbolizing nurture, shelter, and fidelity. This makes the whole wedding ceremony more active and emotionally driven than your usual Christian wedding of two people waiting still for a priest to stop talking about the promises they're supposed to already know they were making for the other. With this wedding ritual, love takes an active role as a series of actions one must take to prove one's devotion to the other. It is not only pretty words, but a performance, a labor that must be mirrored in the other, that must be answered in kind for there to be a consenting, loving bond. The fertile aspect of the magical objects, the wine, the candle, and the ring, all give it a mythic aura that is underscored by this very real thing, compromise. You cannot really marry by accident, you have to make that choice. It is a contract, one you enter by your own accord, with a promise to take care of your partner for as long as the bond may last. And I think this perspective on marriage is just delightful. It refuses to paint it in this traditional, borderline misogynistic marriage is a trap men fall for, but as a realistic effort and life change that cannot be taken lightly. The reward for that compromise and effort, if one needs to call it that way, is companionship. Love is its own reward. It is not a sacrifice, but a partnership, an agreement. And there's something beautiful in the making of that decision. And the love triangle between Victor, Victoria, and Emily is truly one of the best I've seen. It motions the plot forward, and for quite some time there's no clear answer of who Victor's going to end up with. As with most love triangles, the two options, let's call it that, represent opposites. Obviously, with Victoria representing life, Emily representing death. Victoria's world being one of social expectation, of familiar pressures, of emotional repression. Emily's world being one of mutual support, of independence and freedom of choice and expression, of lack of expectations. One's first choice would, of course, be life, until you become aware of how it really works, how life waits for nobody, how life is filled with effort that may lead to nowhere, to sickness and poverty, to humiliation and disappointment. Death, on the other hand, waits for all. It is a place of partying, of enjoyment, of peace and harmony. This is what Victor discovers during his time in the underworld. The choice then isn't just about which girl he likes best. It's a matter of life or death. This is about compromises, that which one makes in marriage to live for oneself and for the other, and the one that one makes in death, in the seconds before suicide, to leave everything behind and live for nobody, not even for oneself. So this is a theme of the movie, one of many themes, really. The desire for acceptance and the desire for escape all boil down to one choice. And I think it's pretty cool that still, despite this being a pretty heavy theme by itself, both characters are given similar weight, despite Emily being the titular corpse bride, the character that has suffered the most, the one who we are asked to sympathize with. Victoria is never really left behind. She has her own motivation to marry Victor, and she takes action to fulfill her desire. Just as Victor climbs up walls and rushes to hostile places that may seem like refuges, Victoria climbs down her wall, rushes with Pastor Galswell's, hoping for a helping hand, for a figure of authority to step in that never comes. What's more, that hands her back to a family that only has contempt for her. Despite being a quiet, polite lady, Victoria speaks her mind, especially as the story progresses. She realizes if she wants something, she cannot wait for that to be handed to her. She needs to speak out, to protest, to ask. Her efforts prove to be futile, much like Victor's, but she has tried. She has made choices to be closer, at least a little bit closer to her objective. And comparing it to Alice in Wonderland, the last movie I talked about in this channel, even if her attempts don't lead her to her objective, having Victoria protesting against her parents or against their religious authority, against her own husband, against all authority figures, it's really cool. She does it all presumably for the same reason Victor's parents wander around aimlessly looking for their son, so that she can marry him. But the fact that they had these two moments together in which their kindness towards one another and the affection they have for the other is made patent, I don't think it's a stretch to say that Victoria also does this also mostly simply because she cares for Victor. She could just sit around and wait for the others to find him. But she makes the effort, she escapes her home and seeks help. Another example of selflessness. I have to say, I'm going to chalk it up to two of the three credited screenwriters, Caroline Thompson and Pamela Petler. I really wonder if John August alone would have given both the dead and the living bride the same amount of free will, of choice, even if these choices lead to nowhere. The movie could easily just cut everything with Victoria's subplot, maybe in order to develop Barkey Spearn's almost pepper-thin villain character. But no, she is given her own scenes to shine, her own moments to come into her own and become someone else than just Victor's object of desire. She displays her own motivation, that Victor just as well is her own object of desire, someone she cares about and who she maybe cares about more than his own parents. Someone who sees in him a future, a life, just as he could see a life with her. In the end, Emily makes her own act of selflessness. contrasted with entitlement that most of the negatively portrayed characters have, making a choice not for her own satisfaction, but for the ultimate happiness of Victor and Victoria as well. Something which I haven't mentioned yet, but I like a lot, is how, despite being clearly jealous of Victoria and her liveliness, Emily never wishes Victoria any harm. Her anger at finding Victor and Victoria together is, as it should be, mainly towards Victor, who indeed was the one who lied to her. And lo and behold, the love triangle is never reduced to a competition. When Emily learns that the only reason Victor has consented to marry her is because of his own hopelessness, she backs off. She learns that love, romantic love, the love that people marry for, is not a reality between them. She does love him, she says it, she was ready to prove it, but she knows that for her desire to be fulfilled, she would need to take someone else's life and chances of further happiness. So it is her turn to sacrifice her own happiness, to be selfless, to the sake of someone else.
I can't.
What's wrong?
This is wrong. I was a bride. My dreams were taken from me. Well, now I've stolen them from someone else. I love you, Victor. But you're not mine.
It is her act of respect for his want, for his self and well-being, and the conclusion of her character arc. Her final understanding of what love truly is. And that's really freaking sweet too. Right now I'm not saying anything other than text. This is the story. Those complexities are there if one looks for them, and I love it. Also this. I love this. And on that subject, Corpse Bride has scenes that are just sweet. A lot of romantic comedies don't even have that. As romantic as Big Fish, written by previously mentioned John August, this time by himself, just to give an example, can aspire to be, the sweetness is sort of artificial. All actions of kindness are driven by selfish and kind of desperate attempts at being noticed and loved back, which by itself is not inherently bad, but it does lead to a feeling of, again, entitlement. It's reasons like this that the romance in so many romantic comedies and romantic dramas feel creepy and not very loving, because I have been conditioned to buy romance in a 120-minute movie where you rush to introduce characters and chemistry between them. But you got to make me believe that these people really care about each other, not that they only want the other. In the end, even though, it implies because, well, they're in a church, and she has the wedding dress and got a bouquet and a wedding was about to take place, Victor and Victoria do not get married, at least not on screen. They will, probably, but the ending is left right there, so there's a chance that they won't, or at least they would take their time to know each other. It doesn't really matter by this point. What does matter is the end of the titular Corpse Bride, who did not have what she wanted but achieved what she needed, a way to move past her trauma and her obsession to finally be free and at peace with herself. Because she didn't really need marriage to be at peace. The construction of a necessity to be validated and saved through marriage is completely her own doing. It is her own self-put spell, her want and motivation. It adds to the tragedy of the character when, after being brutally betrayed, the second man she trusts ends up lying to her, and adds so much value when she finally gives up her wish just because it is the right thing to do. Nobody tells her to do it. Though Victor is the point of view character, Emily is the protagonist and the hero. She is the title character, after all. and she changes. It is her own change of motivation which leads the story to its happy ending. The character arc is hers.
I look at you and see my life that might have been. Your face just ghostly.
The underlying sadness, because this is a pretty gloomy movie, does build up the happier scenes, making them happier in turn, and building this whole theme of opposites. The scene with the dead people meeting their loved ones is... I love it. It is perfect. Moreover, it has no real relevance to the plot. It doesn't make the town's population participate actively in the big final climax, but it is a scene that sums up the tone of the movie really well and strengthens the reality of this world, in which the living and the dead are shown to be able to coexist, to understand the other. The initial fear or rejection can give place to love and respect. It's these types of scenes that stick to the memory and are definitely the best in the movie. Corpse Bride is a bittersweet, charming little movie that doesn't have great ambitions, and it's perfectly okay with that. It's the sort of childhood movie I can return to like comfort food, but despite its apparent simplicity, it offers a view on love that I don't see very often, and which I think is a valuable lesson for those who still think that to be in love with someone means to be absolutely devoted to them and to be owed that love back. It teaches that love is something that must go both ways, that must be mutual and consensual, and that it's labor, it's effort, it's a series of actions, not only an emotion or a list of wordy promises. And it's curiously funny that this dreary looking movie with brushed skeletons, ice and soup, and frankly unsettling character design achieves that. That's something that sells itself as being weird and dark and ends up with the title character dying for good, has such a sweet message on love. Thanks for making it this far into the video. I hope it has been interesting. I think it's pretty obvious that I really enjoyed this movie and I had a lot of things I wanted to talk about. I went on a tangent about animation and character design, but I also really wanted to mention how this is Leica's first movie and how it set its brand as a movie company in general. Also how the Corpse Bride fits into the gothic horror, even gothic romance genre, how it addresses the theme of class and social mobility, how it tackles gender dynamics, and also, for example, John August, Caroline Thompson, and Pamela Petler's other movies, and how they compare to this one, in which they work together. And of course, the original tales that this movie seems to have been based on. But you can get more information on that on the video and the article down in the description. Maybe some other day I'm going to keep at it about this movie because there's a lot I wanted to talk about. But I think that this video is long enough already, and I basically talked about at least the basic thematic things that have always stayed with me. So well, that's all from me. Take care and thanks for watching.